Welcome back to the Zero E Michigan podcast. I'm Carl Bloss, and my co-host is.
Larry Hudson.
So today we have with us Joe Kliewer. So thanks for being on the show, Joe. A little bit of background. Larry and I came across the Out of Spec podcast where you were explaining your plan to do a solar cannonball run with your Tesla. And, I have behind me an Aptera, so I'm all about solar mobility. But with a Tesla, this is something a little bit new. So for those not familiar with your journey, could you give us a quick elevator pitch as to what you did, and then we'll get into the specifics.
So I powered a Tesla solar power, which is it's a lot harder feat than something as efficient as an Aptera. Got to generate a lot more power, and so I was just doing the calculations. Like, well, that's got a lot of panels, but hey, it fits. So I figured out a way to stuff 64 panels in the back of a Tesla with a bunch of electronics, and kind of hacked my way into solar powering a Tesla. And I thought, well, what better journey to do than the historic Cannonball Run? Set a world record in the process going New York to LA, albeit the slowest Cannonball Run. But I think it's the first purely solar powered production EV. So people have done it, but they've charged on and off at other locations. So I completely cut myself off from any supercharger network, and just the sun alone went New York to LA in a full size production EV with no support crew. Although I had family and friends, so I had some support, but no physical support as I made the journey. And I did it all the way. It took me a lot longer than I planned, but I made it work. So
So the trip details, I think you said it was about 3,000 miles. Is that right?
yeah, it was right at 3,000 ish. I think I did a little bit more, maybe 100 or so over, because I had to make a few detours to my different stops. So I wasn't just right on the exact shortest route, but for the most part, it was the most efficient route. Kind of come down and get onto I-40, and then take I-40 all the way across into California.
And Joe has a YouTube channel, by the way. So if you want to get into the details. So how long did the whole journey take?
I think it was 57 days, and
Wow.
I had planned on. I was like, ideally I could do it in 20. Maybe it'll be more like 30, and then worst case 40. And I ran into a few problems. Probably the biggest I didn't anticipate was I planned everything for an earlier start. I got a late start, and then the sun was so low on the horizon. It was still good from a pure solar power standpoint, but my panels, I couldn't get them far enough apart to not shade the back panel. So the shading on the panels really killed my generation. So that just pushed everything back, and then just weather and other circumstances turned my 30 days into 57 days. So although I've heard a good estimate when you're doing, for engineers, you plan out how long you think it's going to take, and then you just multiply it by pi, and that's what you're really going to get. So maybe I was kind of in the right ballpark.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm a chemical engineer by training, so I did my share of projects. It's not too far off.
I want to say though, it definitely, I first watched it on Out of Spec. And so it was just an overview, made it seem pretty tame. But you really got to go to his channel and just watch what he had to go through each day. And like he's talking, setting up the panels to really appreciate what he had to go through. Wow.
If nothing else, watch day one, right? Going up that hill, and then like everything is running out of juice. My GoPro, everything so perfect tension. But and it wasn't even staged, right? But I was
Yeah.
like, oh man, is he gonna make it up the hill? So by the way, I love the fact that you made mention of The Martian, right? So when on that book and movie that was made, and where the guy's basically trying to get to this launch site by setting up solar panels, charging the battery on his rover, and then driving a little bit more. It did make me think of that before you ever mentioned it. So speaking of which, cadence of charging and driving. I think in your early videos you were kind of planning for 2 days of charging and one night of driving. Your setup was, if I got the details right here, 64 panels, so 100 watts each, nominal, so 6.4 kilowatts. So that's the maximum you could expect. So how did that work out? 2 days of driving, sorry, 2 days of charging, one day of driving. Obviously, it took longer, but just that cadence alone, how did that work out?
Yeah, the first thing that kind of hit me was, I was going to drive at night, get to the site, set up, but when you do a trip, so you tear everything down and then you drive all night and then you set everything up in the morning, you're exhausted. And so then I thought, well, I'll relax and just charge in the sun. I won't have to do anything. But there was all these little things that would come up. Um, I'd be shuffling the panels around, trying to find a location. Uh, it wasn't, it was a lot more work than I'd anticipated. I thought it would take 2 hours to set up, and that was spot on. But it's all the extra stuff that would happen. Um, and then that combined with, kind of learning how the Tesla works, because I bought the car, gosh, less than 6 months before I left. It was my first EV. And so I'm still kind of learning the Tesla and figuring out the car at the same time. At the same time,
Yeah,
I'm
like
trying to figure out how to film and
turn off Tesla, turn off Tesla.
yeah. Oh my goodness. It's yeah, it's just it keeps turning on. And I think the second stop I was at, I keep my food in the car. So I'd be like opening and closing the doors. And every time you do that, the car turns on and then it turns on the high voltage battery and everything's just phantom draining. And so, yeah. And even when you go turn it off, you still have to wait, 15 minutes before it actually turns off the contactors and everything. So it's just sitting there powering on, I can just see all the little modules in the car. It's like whatever module controls the windshield or the windshield wipers and the automatic windows. It's all on, awake. It's like, no, go to sleep. I don't need you right now.
Yeah, and I remember you talking about the autopilot. Like, should I be using autopilot, full self-driving? Like, because that computer is going to be using who knows what. I mean, you don't know. Tesla
Yeah.
engineers will, I think you mentioned the numbers anywhere between 500 and 700 watts, which, it's significant. So do I drive with it, without it? I mean, did you find those
Yeah.
things actually made a difference?
I couldn't really do enough testing to see. I tried it on and off, but I didn't get enough A/B comparison to really say. Uh, but what I found out that really it didn't matter because I couldn't use full self-driving anyway because it would make really dumb moves because of my driving habits are completely different. So an example, I'm in the slow lane. Right. So someone comes up behind you and they're going to pass on the fast lane and pass you. Well, Tesla in its infinite wisdom is like, oh, there's someone coming up behind me. I should get out of their way. So it merges into the fast lane to get out of their way.
Wow.
And I'm like, no, Tesla, that is not what I want to do. I don't want to start a road rage incident here. So I turn it off and I just use the base autopilot, which is really good because it won't change lanes. It'll stay in its lane. And if there's someone in front, it'll come up and kind of get not too close, but maybe close enough to kind of get some drafting. And so I just use that the whole time. And that has real nice, smooth throttle response. Full self-driving, anything other than interstate, it can be real jerky and it's kind of tweaky. The steering wheel kind of, it's trying to figure out what to do and it'll jerk back and forth and then go and stop. And it's like not smooth enough. So I ended up just using autopilot. I couldn't drive late at night for 6 hours without, cruise control and autopilot. So that was a huge relief. So that kind of decided for me, really.
Yeah, autopilot is kind of a lifesaver. I mean, not that people should be driving when they're super tired, but it does make a difference. Also, that your brain isn't making all those little micro adjustments just right off the bat. So I think it actually helps you stay more alert. Um,
Yeah, you can survey and just look around and be real alert. You're not, zoned in, just staring down the highway the whole time. So
yeah.
Now, is it true it will see a deer like you could see behind trees? Is there some sort, or no, that's not necessarily what it can pick up? Like, is it going to see that deer running behind the trees?
it kind of tracks. I actually had, I don't know if it was a raccoon or something ran out in front of me. And at this particular time, I did have full self-driving on, and it slowed down and started to make aggressive maneuvers to avoid the raccoon.
Oh,
So, I mean, I,
wow.
I immediately took over because I don't know what it's really going to do. But until I took over, it was handling the situation pretty good. So,
Wow, right on. And then the other thing I was thinking, you're talking about brain, Carl, is it's so like to watch him set up all the panels, everything he had to go through, right? Because your brain, at least my brain, just doesn't want to accept that there's going to be that many panels needed 2 days of charging to go one day of driving. It just, you know, it really helps me get my brain to be realistic about it. Like, wow, that's a lot of panels. And what are
Yeah.
you doing with the panels now?
Well, what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I've got 64 and the stands, and I think I'll sell them. So I'll set up a shop, and then after my video series is complete, I'll offer them up to sell them, and maybe I'll autograph them or something and put a Cannonball sticker on them or something. So if you want to
Dibs.
buy
Yeah.
the panel and the stand, I got 64 for sale here pretty soon. Because yeah, I
Now,
don't
did
need
you
64.
research like those were the best performing panels for the buck? How did you wind up with those?
Yeah, I had been kind of playing around a while with solar panels, and I really like SunPower, the panels they made. They have the best cells, the best durability, and they actually quit making those panels, but they're still selling kind of new old stock. So I was able to buy 2 pallets directly from the manufacturer, and you can get them online now, still pretty cheap, like 125 on Amazon, which is a pretty good deal because they're so much better quality than a lot of the other flexible panels. But yeah, now
Does it
they're
come with a does it come like an adhesive backing or how or no?
no, a lot of people will, stick them to the roof of the RV or something. I don't think that's a great way to do it unless you have some kind of ventilation underneath because they do get hot. And not only does the heat kill the efficiency, but it can, degrade the life of the panel. And then you got to park in the sun. Who wants to camp in the sun? So my thought
Okay.
was I'll go camping. I'll take 4 of these panels. I'll put them out in the sun. I'll camp here in the shade and just run some wires out, and that'll power my tent and everything. And then I started thinking about it. Well, I got one, two, three, four. How many would it take to power my car? I took my tent camping setup and just expanded it, multiplied it, big enough to power a car. And that's how I started off with that panel as the best camping panel. And then that's how I ended up with it to charge the
Okay.
car. Now, in
Wow.
hindsight, if I could have gotten to with a bigger panel and fit fewer larger panels in the car would have been better. But I didn't have room. And I had kind of come up with 2 ideas. One was a Victron system, which would be Victron inverters and batteries. Another was a Solarc inverter. And the Victron, I couldn't get stateside what I wanted, so I ended up going with Solarc. But you've got essentially two different types. You've got the low frequency inverters, the big heavy 60 hertz ones. Then you've got the newer higher frequency, much lighter and smaller. And I couldn't do that with Victron. They've got this all-in-one charge controller that weighs like 22 pounds, and it has 2 solar trackers. It does 240 volt, and it would have been perfect, but I couldn't get it here in the U.S. So I kind of switched over to the Solarc one.
Okay.
But ideally, you want to go DC to DC.
Well, that
And at
was
the
going to be my
time,
next. Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my topics. So the DC to AC to DC conversion, and you mentioned in your videos as well, is lossy, right? Every time you
yeah,
convert, you're going to lose. But with off-the-shelf components right now, that was probably your only choice. The couple from the Netherlands, the 4x4 electric, they had a custom DC to DC conversion system made, and yet they still, I believe, had to monitor the current and things like that to make sure that the
yeah.
charge weight rate was right because that wasn't fully automated. So that speaks to the efficiency. So do you see that as something that's possibly coming to the market? And maybe that speaks to a bigger question, like what do you see the practical applications of this moving forward?
Yeah. So I have some people look at me and be, that's so impractical. It's like, yeah, this is not the practical way to do it. But this is more of a fun experiment. Can it be done? So I was looking all over, and then I connected with someone through my channel, and they sent me a link to a company in California that's getting ready to make a DC to DC EV charger. Now, the trick is, how come no one's made it before? And I can kind of see the rationale. It's like, why would you have a solar panel and array that can only charge a car? Because if you're not going to produce AC power, what good is it for, right? You can't power your house. You can't do a lot of things. It's kind of, you would say it's not worth it. There's no market. However, there is a market where, let's say you're off grid or it's really expensive to bring in power, or you don't want to go through all the regulatory requirements to connect to the grid. So there's a company in California making a DC to DC EV charger. So much lighter, much more efficient. I think I lost about 20% round trip by the time I got from my panels into the car. Um, so this could be, in the high 90s in terms of the total efficiency. And for the off-grid case with the new EVs coming out, it's a really powerful use case. So my thought is you make a solar covered carport. It's a stationary install. And current technology today would be you need solar panels, a few $1,000s. You need a battery, thousands of dollars. You need an AC inverter, thousands of dollars. So you've got, 20, 30 grand for the system. But let's say you've got one of the new Lightning or maybe the new Silverado truck or the Cybertruck. It's already got built-in AC power. It's got a huge inverter, like 10 plus kilowatt, and it's got a huge battery. So now your solar system doesn't need a battery and inverter. It's already built into the vehicle. So you drive up, let's say up north in Michigan, you've got a cabin. So you've got a covered carport. So you drive in with your truck, you park, and you've got covered parking bonus. Your whole system is only a solar array. So it's not too expensive. You just got some solar panels. You plug it into the box, you plug it into your car or your truck. Now you're charging your truck in this remote location, and your truck's got exportable power. So now you can power your cabin. So you've got everything you need for a small off-grid living, and all it cost you was solar panels and a box that does DC to DC charging. And I think that's a powerful use case. The other is in some areas where the regulatory requirements to connect to the grid, say in New York or something, is just outrageously expensive and takes years to get all the permits and everything required. Well, if you're off grid, and you're just DC charging your EV, you can bypass all that. So you don't need all the regulatory requirements and approvals and everything. Or maybe you're somewhere where electricity is so expensive, California, where it makes sense, just because instead of let's say a system, a third is the panels, a third is the battery, and a third is the inverter, roughly speaking. If you can cut that cost down to one third and just do solar panels, well, yeah, you don't get sun unless you can't use it unless you're charging your car. But at a third the price, why not? Especially, work from home or something like that. So I think the use case for a direct DC to DC charging system is growing. And I'd kind of like to be in on that trend and build some off-grid covered carport EV charging stations.
That
Well,
would be cool. I have this building, and the same thing. I'm like, man, the all the equipment so that the state or the power company can only give me a third of what they charge me for electricity. So I've been finding, heat pumps that the solar panels directly plug into. And so I don't have to be tied into the grid to run, those mini splits. And now that I'm hearing there is the DC, I'm wondering how they're doing the car. Now, I couldn't do that with my Volt, right, Carl? I don't have that DC ability, right? That's going to be Leaf, the Bolts with the fast charger, right? To have the DC ability.
Yeah.
yeah,
I'd
the
have to have
DC,
that 55 kilowatt DC charger.
right. Yeah, right.
Okay.
The plug-in hybrids, except for a few exceptions, typically only have a level 2, which is AC. So then your charger on board is AC to DC. So there's no practical way to go directly into the DC of the battery. Post-trip reflections, knowing what you know now, would you do it again? What would you do differently in terms of gear, strategy, tactics?
Yeah. My first thought was, I'm never doing this again. But, like a lot of things, you start thinking about it again. It's like, well, if I changed a few things, it would be a lot better. Maybe I could do it again. uh, yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing is when do you do it? If you do it right in the middle of the summer, you've got a lot of heat, and that kills the efficiency of your panels. And also, if you're camping, I didn't want to be out in the desert at 110 degrees camping. So I think maybe on either side of the summer solstice, and you probably want to be earlier, say May. The thought there is you've got the sun is coming higher and higher, you're getting more sunlight, but you haven't, thermally soaked the earth yet. So
Yeah.
the temperature kind of lags a little bit. So you've got the peak sun with not the temperature, although maybe you have more rainy weather. So it's like, well, then okay, maybe have more rain, so then leave later. Uh, and my strategy was, well, I wanted to leave in September when school started, so that campsites would be available. And that turned out to not be beneficial at all because they were all booked up anyway. And turns out they're not the best spot to camp or to do it because you have a lot of shade from trees. So finding a campsite with open area was pretty difficult. So I think the revised version would be plan out stops and get permission ahead of time with either individuals or private landowners to do it there so that you have guaranteed open locations. So that's the one
And
thing.
then is it ability to set the panels further apart? I know that was one of your issues. They were so close to
Well,
shade
that's
themselves.
cabling,
Yeah.
right? You just have to recut all the
Yeah,
cables,
yeah.
which would have been a
If I
pain.
would have known that, I would have redone and probably added a little extension to each panel, or maybe picked a different panel that had longer cables. Also, slightly larger panel. Um, and then, of course, DC to DC charging, but that wasn't available. But I think in the future it'd be almost a must. And then, do you do a trailer? Do you do a rooftop thing? The arrow hit you take is pretty substantial. So I'm looking at like the Cybertruck right now. And the Silverado EV would be a good one because it's got a truly massive battery, 200 plus kilowatt hours, just insane. And I think the drag coefficient's maybe better than the Cybertruck. So, the Silverado to look like a truck and have a drag coefficient that good is pretty impressive. So I would say candidates would probably be that or the Cybertruck. And then you can fit more gear in the back. But if you can get a trailer that's aerodynamic enough that has built-in solar, so you don't have all the setup time. If you could pull in and, quickly automatically deploy solar panels, that would be the way to go. And what uh, I always like the old videos, the retro encabulator and the turbo encabulator. I think a lot of engineers have seen those where it's just a bunch of gibberish describing a machine that does nothing.
Yeah, I
And I
loved
always
your
got a
YouTube short on that.
yeah, I always got a kick out of that. So I thought, well, if I was going to do it, I would call it the Cyber Encabulator, and it would be a trailer, RV that you could tow behind the Cybertruck or another truck
Well, as
that would
long as
have
you have an
everything.
articulated dingle arm, I mean, you got to have that.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I
So
think that the key is you got to keep it really simple because all the mechanisms and everything, cost a lot of money and it's just points for failure. So anything where it slides, you want to avoid. You want kind of pivoting. I think an example of why sliding mechanisms are not fun. Look at the Rivian, powered tonneau cover. Not fun. It's got a lot of complexity. So if you had something pivot where my thought would be you have an RV and the whole roof is solar, but then the whole roof kind of opens up and it panels and folds out.
yeah,
So you have a single
yeah.
hinged point. And then if it's all actuated, you could use it as a solar tracking. So it could change the angle based on the sun. And I figure you could probably do that and get about a 7 kilowatt array on a trailer. And that would be enough. Now you take an arrow hit, but if you can design it aerodynamically, then maybe the Cybertruck range, let's say it's 300, instead of going half, maybe it goes down to 200. So you've got a 200-mile range, but you've got a large enough solar array that you can pull into a spot, charge in 2 days, and then hit the road, and you don't have any setup and tear down time. And then maybe you're only going 200 miles every 2 days, but 100 mile an hour or 100 miles a day average, that'd be a 30-day trip. So that would be kind of a fun excursion, I think.
Now, are you an engineer or what's your day job?
Yeah, mechanical engineer. So I kind of had to learn the electronic side of it, just playing around. But a lot of the equations are the same. Power, in a mechanical world, power is, force times speed or shaft speed times torque. In the electrical
Okay.
world, it's volts times amps. So, it's just it's all the same stuff. It's just different equations. So,
And then you live here in Michigan?
yeah, I'm just north of Detroit and Bloomfield Hills, Michigan.
I don't know if you're signed up, but there's a Tesla event here in Muskegon every summer. Might be kind of cool to bring like maybe a subset of your setup.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there last year and I had the idea in my head and I had printed out kind of what it would look like, but I hadn't bought anything yet. And so I made a few connections there uh, to kind of talk about it. Of course, back then it was just kind of an idea, and the kind of the response I get from most normal people is, okay, cool. Sure, if it
So
works.
did you have your Model Y? You came to the Tesla beach event there?
Yeah, yeah, I had just got it. It was brand new, I think, when I was
All right.
there.
Well, it's happening
I,
again
you
this
must,
year. So, if you got time,
Yeah, I'll
uh,
be there.
it'd, it'd be fun to have you.
If I've still got it, I'll pack the inverter and everything back in and put the battery in. I won't take all the panels probably because I'll sell those by then.
Okay, well,
But
if you got some extras, I'll take a few,
all
unless
right.
they're already spoken for. And I did want to talk about your supports. You brought those up a couple times. The solar panel supports made out of aluminum. That was kind of clever design. Are you taking that any further at all? Because I could see a practical application, even just for setting up a couple panels for camping or something like that.
Yeah. So I had the idea and I kind of made it for myself a few years ago when I was just camping because I needed something to hold the panel up. I thought, well, that's pretty clever. I think I'll put some more effort into it and kind of engineer it to be a robust design. And then I contacted Easton Aluminum, and they make tent poles, they make arrows, all kinds of stuff from aluminum and carbon fiber. And they made me a batch for this run, and then my next plan is to order another batch. I think I want to order 128. So I had 64 for the run. The thought was I'll sell all these, and if I get a good enough response they sell, then I'll get another run of 128 made, sell those, and if that goes good, I'll make double that. I'll make 256, and I'll just keep doubling it until I kind of saturate the market. I don't know how good the market's going to be, but the plan is to make those. They're going to be kind of expensive. I think I'm anticipating selling them at like 39 or $40 for each one, just because they're made in the US and my cost is kind of high. And then if that's kind of too high, I have another version that's just fiberglass out of China that I sourced. And that'll be, I think I could sell those for like 15 and still make a profit. So I'd have two versions, low cost China, $15, and then a high-end US made aluminum for 40. And so yeah, once I finish up the story on YouTube, I think I'll do a video on that, and I'm working on setting up an e-commerce site and just kind of learning it all as I go. So I'll try that, and then I'll also try selling it on Amazon. Their fees are so high that by the time I sell it on Amazon, I don't know how much I'll make, but yeah, I'll give it a try. I'll learn. If I don't make any money, then I was like, all right, I learned a lesson. If I make some money, cool.
Good. Well,
So
keep us posted, and then we can put it in the show notes and the video description. Send people your way. But I thought that was pretty clever. Also, just the little bolts, like screw them into the ground so they don't all flop over from the wind. I could see that. Of course, that's pretty simple, but nonetheless, just the idea. Otherwise, you had some of your disaster videos where
yeah,
everything was flying away and flopping over. And speaking of disasters, the one thing I was a little bit surprised about is that you got some pushback from some of your campsites where they're like, "No, we don't want you setting up the panels. Like, we don't want you setting up the panels in the grass." Like, really? I
yeah,
mean, 1 or 2 days of solar panels covering the grass is not going to destroy the grass. I mean,
yeah.
what,
That was
what,
weird. I think that was a state Tennessee thing because the other campsites in Tennessee didn't do that. The government one runs, but the ones that were state run, that was their policy. I think is nothing on the grass. It's like, well, what's the point of camping if you can't, you know, do anything on the grass? I just go to a parking lot then, It's like,
but I imagine that you did get a lot of interaction with people because you're setting up these solar panels and probably everybody wants to know what you're doing, right? It's like every
yeah,
time
they would they
I
would kind of I'd see people looking, I'd set one up or two up and they keep looking and then 10 and then 20 and then 30 and then 40 and then they come over and say, all right, what were you doing? My wife
What
says
was
you're charging your
positive?
car, but
It was positive for the most part, you would say, the reactions?
yeah, I would say probably 95% of the time it was positive.
All
And
right,
then,
good.
some people that it'd be like, oh, that's why I'd never buy an EV. It's like, well, this is not normally how you charge an EV.
right.
Good on you. Thanks for doing that. I really enjoyed it. And again, like to help my brain conceive it. Because even though I know, but to actually see you out there having to set up 40 panels.
Yeah.
What Larry was saying, that's one of those things that we hear at EV shows all the time, where people will say, "Well, why don't you just put a bunch of solar panels on top of the car?" Right? And then you start having to explain that, you get, this many watts out of a square foot or a square meter, and then what that means in terms of the overall power and how much energy a vehicle needs to go down the road, which then, for me at least, ends up leading back down to the discussion about Aptera because of the, 10 miles per kilowatt hour efficiency. And now a vehicle that has 700 watts, I think, of solar, it starts to make more sense. So it's all about the efficiency. So, as
Yeah.
soon as you have to work with limited space, limited amount of power, then, like you said, stupid car turned on, right? Or the autopilot is using 500 watts. So all these little things where you're
Yeah.
thinking, man, I could conserve. If I can conserve a little bit more, I could get more range out of it. So, but that is a good lesson, because then I also get people to say, well, why don't you just put a fan on top of the car and you can generate with wind? And then I have to have this. First of all, I'm thinking, okay, you were the guys sleeping in the back of physics class in high school, right? And then I have to try to explain about perpetual motion and how this doesn't work. And there are some people that are super adamant, like, well, I think as technology advances, we're going to be able to do that. It's like, no, no, no. There's some
Well, I
fundamental
think it,
laws that just can't be broken. Well, we've had some internet issues on Joe's side, but I think we pretty much wrapped up here. So thanks for joining us. I think this was a fun conversation. Check out Joe's YouTube channel. We'll put a link to it. Watch his journey. He's not completely finished yet at the time of our recording, but he's going to finish all that up and kind of put a cap on the entire journey.
So thanks again, Joe. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And again, subscribe isn't like a magazine. It just helps YouTube to share our videos.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time. If you enjoyed or learned from this episode of Zero E Michigan, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Visit our YouTube channel for other related videos at youtube.com/@0E-Michigan.